Hello, and thank you for joining me on this journey into the mysteries of the past. Tonight, we step into the shadows of ancient Rome, where the rise and fall of a great empire is woven with ambition, power, and intrigue. From its beginnings as a modest republic on the banks of the Tiber, to becoming a sprawling empire that commanded the Mediterranean world and beyond. Rome's story is a tale of ambition, glory, and a dramatic fall from power. As we explore the complex forces behind Rome's triumphs and its eventual collapse, let your imagination wander through the marble streets of the city, the echoes of ancient leaders, and the whispers of long-forgotten conspiracies. The pages of history hold many secrets, and tonight, we gently unravel them together. If you find yourself intrigued, please consider leaving a like, subscribing, or sharing your thoughts below. Your support is a beacon that helps others find their way into this fascinating journey. You can also turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our future explorations into the mysteries of the past. But for now, take a deep breath. Let your mind relax, your body ease, and allow yourself to drift into the world of ancient Rome. Let us begin. In the shadowed hills of central Italy, where the land folds and curves into valleys rich with history, the Tiber River quietly meanders. Once a narrow, unassuming stream, it would become the lifeblood of an emerging civilization, one that would reshape the known world. The beginnings of Rome, as much legend as history, were far humbler than the empire it would one day become. The story begins with two twins, Romulus and Remus, abandoned and left to die in the wild. Raised by a she-wolf, their survival was the first of many tests that would define the city they would find. The myth is simple. Two brothers, destined for greatness, rising from nothing, as so many heroes do. Their names would echo through time, tied to the ancient walls of a city that seemed destined for greatness, though its future was far from clear. But even before the twins, there were others who sought refuge along the banks of the Tiber. Refugees, outcasts, those who had nowhere else to go. They found themselves among fertile land and strategic crossroads, a place where the heart of the Italian peninsula beat strong. The river was not just a waterway, it was a conduit of life, offering sustenance and access to distant shores. Traders and travelers followed its course, while Roman farmers, in turn, grew olives and grapes along its fertile shores. It was here that Rome was born, an assembly of people seeking survival, their destinies intertwined with a river that would carry them into history. In these early days, Rome was far from an empire. It was a small, fortified settlement that faced constant threats from surrounding tribes. Its people, known for their resilience, fought to defend their modest city. As these struggles unfolded, so too did the story of Rome's identity, a city of outcasts and survivors, but also of ambition. These first Romans, through sheer determination, formed alliances with neighboring tribes, seeking not just to defend, but to expand. They were not the only ones with ambition. The hills of the Italian peninsula were dotted with tribes, each with their own stories and dreams of dominance. Rivalries flared, sometimes leading to skirmishes, but sometimes yielding to treaties. It was here that Rome began its slow, steady rise. Yet beneath the surface of these alliances, tensions simmered. The struggle for dominance among the people of Italy was constant. There were those who sought peace and cooperation, and those who believed that force alone could secure their future. The Tiber River, which had once been a tranquil stream, was now a key player in this ongoing struggle, a symbol of both the promise and the perils that lay ahead. The early Romans built their city with an eye toward both defense and expansion. There, settlement grew, carefully carved from the land, with sturdy walls and a central forum where decisions were made. These early years were marked not just by military battles, but by the forging of the Roman identity. A people who were both warriors and diplomats, who knew when to fight and when to negotiate. Even in this early period, the Romans were already beginning to understand the importance of alliances, both within and outside their own community. Neighboring tribes tested their resolve, while some chose to embrace the growing power of Rome. Through diplomacy and force, Rome began to shape its path forward, carving out its place in the world, where its future would be intertwined with that of the wider Mediterranean. But the path was not easy. Though the river brought prosperity and connection, it also exposed the city to the potential of outside invasion. The first Romans would face many challenges, not just from foreign tribes, but from within their own ranks. The tensions between the wealthy and the poor, the patricians and plebeians, would threaten the unity of this early republic. In time, the city grew from a mere settlement into a republic, a delicate balance between different factions, each with their own interests. Yet, even in these early days, Rome was defined by something greater than the sum of its parts. The ambition of its people, driven by both necessity and vision, pushed them forward. The ambition of the Roman people would be both their strength and their undoing, guiding them through their earliest struggles and shaping them into one of history's most powerful civilizations. Rome's story, in its beginning, was not one of grandiose dreams of empire or vast conquests. It was a story of survival, of a small village carved out of the hills of Italy, with the Tiber River at its heart. And though the road ahead was fraught with challenges, it would be the people of this small settlement, bound together by a common need for survival and ambition, who would eventually rise to claim their place in history. The transformation from monarchy to republic was not born of harmony, but of conflict, a violent rupture that would change the course of Roman history forever. Rome, once ruled by kings, was about to embark on a new chapter, one marked by a shift in power that would forever alter the structure of its government. This was not a peaceful transition. It was a rebellion, a rising from beneath the weight of a monarch's rule. At the heart of this revolution was the last king of Rome, Tarquin the Proud. A ruler whose arrogance and cruelty had earned him the hatred of the people, Tarquin's reign reached its breaking point when his actions drove the citizens of Rome to the edge. It was in the wake of his tyrannical rule that the Roman elite, led by a group of nobles and soldiers, decided that the monarchy had to end. The decision to overthrow the king was not taken lightly, but the people were desperate for change. They had tasted the bitterness of oppression, and now they yearned for a new kind of governance, one where power would be shared, not held by a single man. The overthrow of Tarquin in 509 BCE marked the birth of the Roman Republic. The king's expulsion was followed by the establishment of a system of government that would lay the foundation for Rome's future dominance. In place of a monarch, power would be divided among elected officials known as consuls. These consuls were chosen by the people to serve for a single year, a check against the rise of another ruler like Tarquin. It was a system that sought balance and fairness, although it would be tested by internal divisions and external threats. The Republic was built on the idea of shared authority. The consuls, who held executive power, were paired to ensure no one man could dominate. The Senate, composed of Rome's aristocracy, served as the advisory body, guiding the consuls in matters of law and governance. The assemblies, where the people could vote on laws and elect leaders, ensured that the voice of the Roman citizen was heard, albeit mostly for the privileged few. This tension was not merely theoretical, it played out on the streets of Rome. The plebeians, tired of being overlooked and oppressed, began to demand more. Their struggle for political rights would come to a head with the creation of the tribunes, officials elected by the plebeians to represent their interests in the government. These tribunes held the power to veto decisions made by the consuls and the Senate, a critical tool that allowed the common people to challenge the aristocracy's dominance. Despite these advances, the Republic was far from stable. It was constantly tested by external threats, from the neighboring tribes on the Italian peninsula to the larger, more powerful nations in the Mediterranean. Rome's military strength was still in its infancy, and the city faced constant dangers from enemies both near and far. Yet it was during this turbulent period that Rome began to shape its military identity, developing the legions that would one day conquer the known world. Rome's early years were also marked by its pursuit of expansion. Even as internal strife threatened to tear it apart, the young Republic turned its eyes outward, seeking to secure its place in the world. The conquest of surrounding lands, often achieved through a combination of military might and strategic alliances, began to reshape the Italian peninsula. Rome's growing influence in the region was a signal to its neighbors that it would not remain a small, isolated city-state for long. As the years passed, the Republic began to solidify its political structure. The Senate, once a collection of powerful families, grew in influence and prestige. The consuls, though elected for only a year, became increasingly powerful, particularly in times of crisis. Yet, the idea of shared power remained central to the Roman ideal. The Republic was designed to prevent any one individual from gaining too much control, a lesson learned from the fall of the monarchy. But even as the Republic took shape, it was clear that Rome was in the midst of a transformation. The rise of its military power, combined with its growing political sophistication, was slowly pushing the city-state toward a new future. The Republic, while still in its infancy, had set the stage for Rome's rise to dominance. The Romans, though divided in many ways, were united by a common desire: survival. The Republic was not built on the ideals of peace and harmony, but on the necessity of strength. Strength to defend against external enemies, and strength to govern a city that was rapidly growing in both size and ambition. Rome's journey from monarchy to republic was far from simple. It was a story of struggle, compromise, and fierce determination. But it was also the story of a people who, in the face of adversity, were beginning to define what it meant to be Roman. The early republic, with all its flaws and contradictions, would be the foundation upon which the future of Rome would be built. At the heart of Rome's success lay its military, an institution that would define the destiny of the city and, eventually, the empire. Long before the grandeur of the empire and the marble halls of its Senate, the legions were the true architects of Rome's rise. It was through their discipline, innovation, and relentless ambition that Rome expanded its borders, carved out an identity, and secured its place in history. In the earliest days of the Roman Republic, the Roman army was a humble force, formed of citizen soldiers who fought not for professional glory, but for their homes, their families, and their survival. These men were farmers, craftsmen, and laborers who would put down their tools to take up arms in defense of their fledgling city-state. The early legions, unlike the professional armies of their neighbors, were largely drawn from the ranks of Rome's own citizens. When called upon, they would don armor, shoulder weapons, and march into battle with a single purpose: to protect the land that had given them life. This sense of duty, this unshakable bond to their city and their fellow Romans, was the foundation of Rome's military might. But the Roman army was no simple collection of farmers turned warriors. The legions were an innovative force, shaped by constant adaptation and evolution. In the face of ever-changing battlefields and new enemies, the Roman military would become a finely tuned machine, capable of adjusting its tactics and strategies to meet the demands of war. This ability to evolve and innovate was one of the key factors that set the Romans apart from other civilizations. One of the most important innovations of the Roman army was its organizational structure. The Roman legion was not just a mass of soldiers thrown together. It was a highly disciplined, well-coordinated unit. Each legion was made up of several thousand soldiers, divided into smaller units known as cohorts, each led by a centurion. The centurion was more than just a leader. He was the backbone of the Roman army, the officer who ensured discipline, maintained order, and kept the soldiers in line. The centurion's authority was absolute, and his position was one of great respect. To be a centurion was to be entrusted with the lives of many, and it required not just courage, but wisdom and the ability to lead under pressure. The soldiers themselves, known as legionaries, were equipped with a standardized set of weapons and armor that made them formidable opponents on the battlefield. The primary weapon was the gladius, a short sword designed for close combat, ideal for stabbing rather than slashing. This made the Roman soldier deadly at close quarters, where they would fight in tight formations, pressing their enemies back with precise strikes. In addition to the gladius, legionaries carried a large rectangular shield, the scutum, which provided both protection and offense. The scutum allowed soldiers to form defensive formations such as the testudo, a shield wall that protected them from missile fire and allowed them to advance on their enemies without exposing themselves to the deadly projectiles of archers and slingers. The Roman army's tactical flexibility was another hallmark of its success. Unlike many armies of the time, which relied on heavy infantry charges or cavalry engagements, the Romans developed a wide range of formations and strategies that allowed them to adapt to any situation. They could switch from offensive to defensive tactics with ease, responding to changes in the enemy's movements or weaknesses. The manipulation of terrain was also a key feature of Roman strategy. The legions could march swiftly across different landscapes, setting up camps or fortifications as needed, whether in the open plains of Gaul or the mountainous regions of Spain. Roman soldiers were not just warriors. They were builders, engineers, and logisticians. The army carried with it the tools necessary for constructing roads, bridges, and fortifications, which would become key to Rome's expansion. The construction of roads across its growing empire allowed Roman soldiers to move swiftly between distant provinces, ensuring that the legions could respond to threats quickly and efficiently. These roads, many of which still stand today, became the arteries of the Roman Empire, facilitating not only military movement, but also trade, communication, and cultural exchange. Perhaps one of the most famous aspects of Roman warfare was its use of cavalry. Initially, the Romans had little to no experience with mounted troops, relying instead on their infantry. But as they encountered enemies who wielded cavalry with skill, the Romans adapted. They began to integrate cavalry units into their armies, often forming alliances with local tribes that could provide skilled horsemen. The cavalry provided the Romans with mobility, allowing them to outflank and harry their enemies. Though never as prominent as the infantry, the cavalry became a vital component of the Roman army, complementing the legions and ensuring that the Romans could fight on all fronts. Naval warfare, too, was an area in which the Romans innovated. At the beginning of their military journey, Rome was primarily a land power. But as they expanded into the Mediterranean, they encountered powerful maritime civilizations like Carthage, whose fleets dominated the seas. Initially inexperienced in naval warfare, the Romans quickly learned to adapt. They designed and built new ships like the quinquereme and developed tactics that allowed them to turn naval engagements into land battles. The Roman use of the corvus, a boarding device that allowed soldiers to board enemy ships, was a game changer, allowing the Romans to leverage their superior infantry to defeat opponents at sea. Training and discipline were the cornerstones of Roman military success. The legions underwent rigorous drills that emphasized physical fitness, combat skills, and teamwork. Each soldier was trained to operate within the ranks, ensuring that every individual acted as part of a larger machine. The soldiers learned how to form the famous testudo, to march in perfect synchronization, and to respond to orders without hesitation. Discipline was paramount, and any soldier who broke the rules could face severe punishment. The Romans understood that a well-trained army was a successful army, and they invested heavily in the training of their soldiers. Roman warfare was not just about fighting. It was about strategy, logistics, and the ability to control vast territories. Rome's military was a force that could not be matched in its efficiency and organization. As Rome expanded, the legions adapted, incorporating new techniques, weapons, and tactics. Whether facing the Carthaginian general Hannibal across the Alps, or battling the Germanic tribes along the Rhine, the Romans were masters of warfare. The military did not just fight battles, they built cities, they laid down laws, and they left their mark on the lands they conquered. Through their military prowess, the Romans would go on to dominate the Mediterranean world and beyond. The legions were the ultimate instrument of Roman power, ensuring that Rome's name would be known throughout the ancient world. It was the discipline of the soldiers, the tactical brilliance of their commanders, and the unyielding will of the Roman people that turned a small village on the banks of the Tiber into one of the greatest empires the world has ever known. In the mid-3rd century BCE, Rome faced its first true test, an adversary that would push the nascent republic to the brink of destruction. Across the Mediterranean to the west, the ancient city of Carthage stood as a powerful rival, its wealth, fleets, and armies rivaling Rome's in size. and strength. This was not a clash of small kingdoms, but of two rising powers, each with its own ambitions, looking to dominate the Mediterranean world. This was the beginning of the Punic Wars, a series of brutal conflicts that would define Rome's future. The roots of the Punic Wars lie in the competition for control of trade routes, territories, and influence in the Mediterranean. Carthage, located on the coast of what is now Tunisia, had established a vast maritime empire, controlling key cities in North Africa, Sicily, and parts of Spain. Rome, by contrast, was still a land-based power, but its rapid expansion across the Italian peninsula had already set the stage for conflict. Both powers eyed the same territories, particularly Sicily, a rich and strategically important island that lay between them. The First Punic War, which began in 264 BCE, erupted as a result of a dispute over Sicily. Both Carthage and Rome sought to gain control of the island, and the conflict quickly escalated into a full-scale war. The Romans, initially inexperienced in naval warfare, found themselves at a disadvantage, as Carthage's fleets were the most powerful in the Mediterranean. However, Rome's adaptability became apparent almost immediately. Realizing that they were no match for Carthage's superior naval forces, the Romans turned to innovation. The Romans built an entirely new fleet of ships, designed to be larger and more robust than the Carthaginian vessels. They also developed the corvus, a boarding device that allowed Roman soldiers to board enemy ships and fight as they would on land. This tactic played to Rome's strength, its infantry, and allowed the Romans to turn naval battles into land battles. With this innovation, the tide of the war began to turn in Rome's favor. Over the course of the war, Rome's superior discipline and organizational skills won key naval battles, and after more than 2 decades of fighting, Carthage was forced to surrender in 241 BCE. Sicily became Rome's first province, marking the beginning of its overseas empire. But the victory was not the end of Rome's struggles. The Punic Wars had only just begun, and Carthage, though weakened, was far from defeated. In 218 BCE, the Second Punic War broke out, and it would become one of the most challenging conflicts Rome would ever face. This war would introduce one of history's greatest generals, Hannibal Barca, a Carthaginian leader whose military genius would nearly bring Rome to its knees. Hannibal's most famous and daring maneuver was his audacious crossing of the Alps in 218 BCE. Leading an army of soldiers, elephants, and cavalry, he overcame one of the most formidable mountain ranges in Europe, a feat that seemed impossible. The journey was grueling, and many of Hannibal's forces did not survive, but his determination and strategic brilliance were evident. Once in Italy, Hannibal launched a series of devastating attacks on Roman cities, winning battle after battle with his innovative tactics and superior leadership. His greatest victory came at the Battle of Cannae in 216 BCE, where he encircled and destroyed a Roman army of 80,000 men, one of the most complete and disastrous defeats in Roman military history. For Rome, the stakes could not have been higher. With Hannibal rampaging through Italy, the Roman Republic faced a crisis that threatened to unravel its very existence. But even in the face of disaster, the Romans displayed their characteristic resilience. Rather than abandoning their homeland, they adapted to the new reality. Rome did not fight Hannibal on his terms. Instead, they employed a strategy of attrition, avoiding direct confrontation with Hannibal's army and harassing his supply lines. The Roman general Fabius Maximus known as the delayer, adopted this strategy, refusing to meet Hannibal in battle unless the conditions were favorable. Though this strategy was initially unpopular, it proved effective over time. Meanwhile, Rome began to strike back in other parts of the Mediterranean. The Romans launched campaigns in Spain and North Africa, gradually chipping away at Carthage's power. In 202 BCE, the Romans finally met Hannibal on the battlefield once more at the Battle of Zama in North Africa. Under the command of Scipio Africanus, Rome's forces decisively defeated Hannibal's army, forcing Carthage to sue for peace. The Second Punic War ended in 201 BCE with Carthage's surrender, and Rome emerged as the uncontested power in the Western Mediterranean. The Third Punic War, fought from 149 BCE to 146 BCE, was the final chapter in Rome's struggle with Carthage. Carthage, though still a wealthy and powerful city, was viewed by many in Rome as a lingering threat. The Senate, led by the hardline politician Cato the Elder, pushed for the complete destruction of Carthage. Despite Carthage's attempts to negotiate, Rome declared war one last time, and this conflict would be far more brutal than the previous two. The Romans laid siege to Carthage, and after 3 years of relentless fighting, the city was finally overwhelmed. In 146 BCE, Carthage was destroyed. Its buildings were burned, its people slaughtered or sold into slavery, and its territory became a Roman province. The phrase Carthago delenda est, Carthage must be destroyed, had been fulfilled, and the Roman Republic emerged victorious. The Punic Wars were a defining moment in Roman history. They marked the beginning of Rome's rise as a dominant power in the Mediterranean, laying the groundwork for its later imperial expansion. But the wars also revealed the brutal nature of Roman military and political life. Rome's victories were hard-won, and the costs of these wars were immense. The defeat of Carthage left Rome as the preeminent power in the Mediterranean, but it also left a legacy of violence, destruction, and the consolidation of power that would shape the future of the Republic and set the stage for its eventual transformation into an empire. Through perseverance, innovation, and sheer willpower, Rome had shown itself to be a force to be reckoned with. The Punic Wars, in all their brutality and drama, had proven that Rome was capable of rising above its adversaries, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. And though Carthage had fallen, Rome's ambition was only beginning. Following the devastation of Carthage in the Third Punic War, the Roman Republic entered a period of rapid expansion, one that would stretch its borders across 3 continents. What had begun as a small city-state on the banks of the Tiber River was now on a relentless path toward becoming the dominant power in the ancient world. With its military might, political adaptability, and ambition, Rome carved out an empire that would last for centuries and leave a lasting legacy in world history. The years after the Punic Wars were marked by the Roman Republic's insatiable appetite for conquest. Having triumphed over Carthage, Rome turned its attention to the remaining powers in the Mediterranean world. The Hellenistic kingdoms of the East, once mighty in their own right, were fragmented and vulnerable. Rome, still riding the momentum of its victories, began to absorb these territories, either through military campaigns or by forming strategic alliances. In the Greek world, the Romans faced formidable foes, but used a combination of diplomacy and military force to gain influence. After a series of conflicts with Macedon, Rome eventually became the dominant power in Greece, culminating in the decisive Battle of Pydna in 168 BCE, where the Roman legions defeated the Macedonian king Perseus. With this victory, Rome asserted its control over Greece, though it was not until the fall of Corinth in 146 BCE that Greece was fully absorbed into the Roman sphere. The conquest of Greece not only expanded Roman territory, but also infused Roman culture with Greek ideas. Greek philosophy, art, and literature became deeply influential in Rome, helping to shape its cultural and intellectual landscape. Greek scholars were brought to Rome, and Roman elites eagerly adopted Greek education and traditions, leading to a fusion of the two cultures that would define Roman identity in the centuries to come. But the annexation of Greece was also a reflection of Rome's growing power and its willingness to absorb other civilizations. Meanwhile, Rome's reach continued to stretch westward. Spain, with its vast resources and strategic position, became a key target of Roman expansion. The conquest of the Iberian Peninsula was neither quick nor easy. The indigenous Celtiberian tribes, many of whom had fought valiantly against Carthage, put up a fierce resistance. Rome's victory, however, was inevitable, and by the end of the 2nd century BCE, Rome had established full control over Spain. The integration of Spain into the Roman Republic brought rich mineral resources and vital trade routes, further fueling Rome's ambitions. In the West, Rome also began to focus its attention on the Gauls. Julius Caesar's campaigns in Gaul, which began in 58 BCE, marked one of the most spectacular episodes of Roman expansion. Caesar, the young general who would later become one of Rome's most famous rulers, embarked on a series of military campaigns that would not only expand Rome's borders, but also elevate his own status within Roman politics. Over the course of nearly a decade, Caesar defeated numerous Gallic tribes, culminating in the famous Battle of Alesia in 52 BCE, where he decisively defeated Vercingetorix, the leader of the Gallic resistance. With this victory, Caesar brought all of Gaul under Roman control, securing Rome's position as the most powerful force in Western Europe. The conquest of Gaul was a turning point, not only for Rome's territorial ambitions, but also for its political structure. Julius Caesar's success on the battlefield elevated his popularity to unprecedented levels, and his growing power began to alarm the Roman Senate, which saw him as a threat to the Republic. This tension between military triumph and political power would ultimately lead to the end of the Republic and the rise of imperial rule. As Rome's territorial empire expanded, so too did its economic base. The vast network of roads, built by Roman engineers and soldiers, connected the far-flung provinces of the empire, allowing for the rapid movement of troops, goods, and information. These roads were the lifeblood of Rome's expansion, facilitating trade and military control and ensuring the empire's vast territories could be managed with relative efficiency. Through these roads, the Romans introduced their language, culture, and laws to conquered peoples, spreading Romanization far beyond the city's original borders. Rome's military was the driving force behind its territorial expansion, but its infrastructure and legal systems helped to maintain control over the lands it had conquered. Roman law, with its emphasis on order and stability, became the foundation for governance throughout the empire. The concept of Roman citizenship, though initially limited to a small group of elites, gradually expanded to include the inhabitants of the provinces. By the time of the empire, being a Roman citizen was a prized status that granted legal protections and certain privileges, helping to bind the empire together. The expansion of Rome also marked the beginning of an era of unprecedented wealth and power. The Republic's success in war and its control over vital trade routes allowed for the accumulation of vast amounts of wealth, much of which flowed into Rome itself. The city became the center of commerce, politics, and culture in the ancient world. The influx of wealth led to the construction of monumental buildings, temples, and arenas, some of which still stand today, bearing witness to the grandeur of Rome's imperial age. But as Rome's power grew, so too did the challenges of maintaining control over its vast empire. The Roman Republic, for all its success in military conquest, was struggling with internal strife. The rise of powerful generals like Julius Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus, men who held enormous military power, began to erode the authority of the Senate and the traditional republican system. The Senate, once the cornerstone of Roman governance, found itself increasingly irrelevant in the face of military leaders who commanded the loyalty of vast legions. In the midst of these growing tensions, Rome's expansion began to strain its resources. The vast empire required more soldiers, more infrastructure, and more administration than the Roman Republic was designed to handle. The political system, built on a foundation of shared power, began to buckle under the weight of the Republic's newfound responsibilities. It became increasingly clear that Rome, though it had triumphed in battle and expanded across the known world, could not sustain its republican form forever. The expansion of Rome was both its greatest triumph and its greatest challenge. Through military conquest, strategic alliances, and political maneuvering, Rome had transformed from a small settlement on the Tiber into a Mediterranean superpower. Its territorial empire stretched from the British Isles in the northwest to Egypt in the southeast, from Spain in the west to the reaches of Asia Minor in the east. But as the Republic continued to expand, so too did the internal conflicts and challenges that would eventually lead to its collapse. The road to empire was long, difficult, and filled with both glory and turmoil. Yet, Rome's ability to adapt to its changing circumstances and its unyielding ambition was the key to its success. Julius Caesar's ascent from a relatively modest political background to become one of the most powerful figures in Roman history marks a defining moment in the fall of the Roman Republic. In the chaotic political landscape of late Republican Rome, where factionalism, military loyalty, and personal ambition dominated, Caesar's rise was inevitable. His journey was one of both military brilliance and political cunning, setting in motion events that would irrevocably change the course of Roman history. Born in 100 BCE into the patrician Julii family, Julius Caesar was not a man born to obscurity. His family, though noble, was not among the wealthiest or most influential in Rome. Yet Caesar's personal ambition and talent ensured that he would rise to the highest echelons of Roman society. Early in his career, he aligned himself with powerful figures, including the famous general Gaius Marius and the wealthy, influential Crassus. But it was his partnership with Pompey, the celebrated military general, that would cement his place in history. Together, they formed the First Triumvirate, a political alliance that bypassed the Senate's authority and allowed them to consolidate power in their hands. Caesar's military career was the cornerstone of his rise to power. His campaigns in Gaul, which spanned from 58 BCE to 50 BCE, would make him one of Rome's most famous military commanders. The conquest of Gaul was an extraordinary achievement. Over the course of nearly a decade, Caesar's legions swept through the region, overcoming powerful Gallic tribes and expanding Rome's territory to the north and west. This campaign not only added immense wealth and resources to Rome, but also elevated Caesar's fame to legendary levels. Yet Caesar's success in Gaul was more than just a military triumph. His conquests had transformed him into a hero for the people and a fearsome adversary for his political rivals. His ability to win loyalty from his soldiers through his charismatic leadership and fair treatment was key to his success. Caesar's soldiers were fiercely loyal to him, not just out of fear, but also out of admiration for his leadership on the battlefield. The soldiers' devotion to their commander would prove critical in the political battles that lay ahead. As Caesar's power grew, so did his ambition. The political system of the Roman Republic was already in crisis by the time Caesar returned from Gaul in 50 BCE. The Senate, the body that had once held the reins of power, was divided and corrupt, its authority diminishing in the face of military strongmen like Pompey. Caesar, feeling the weight of his rising power, also understood the political implications of his military victories. Returning to Rome, he knew that a showdown with Pompey, who had grown increasingly wary of Caesar's dominance, was inevitable. The Senate, aligned with Pompey, demanded that Caesar disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen. Caesar, however, was not one to relinquish his power so easily. In 49 BCE, Caesar made the fateful decision that would change the course of Roman history. He crossed the Rubicon River with his army, an act that was tantamount to declaring war on the Senate and Pompey. The phrase, "crossing the Rubicon," would go down in history as a symbol of irrevocable commitment, of a point of no return. Caesar's march on Rome was a gamble, a bold, decisive move that forced the Senate to recognize his power. His forces clashed with Pompey's, and after a series of battles, Pompey fled to Egypt, where he was later assassinated. Caesar's victory in the civil war that followed made him the undisputed ruler of Rome. Once in power, Caesar moved quickly to consolidate his control. He was named dictator, a title that in the past had been used only in times of emergency, but had now taken on a permanent form under Caesar's rule. His reforms were sweeping and ambitious. He restructured the Senate, increasing its membership with loyalists who would back his policies. He also enacted laws aimed at reducing debt, redistributing land to veterans, and expanding Roman citizenship to people in the provinces. These measures won Caesar the loyalty of many Romans, particularly the plebeians, the common people, who saw him as a champion of their rights. But Caesar's rise was not without its detractors. His concentration of power in his own hands alarmed many of Rome's elites, especially those in the Senate. They saw Caesar's actions as a direct challenge to the republican system that had governed Rome for centuries. In the eyes of his enemies, Caesar was a tyrant who threatened the very foundation of the Republic. His assassination on the Ides of March, 44 BCE, was the culmination of a conspiracy led by a group of senators, including some of his closest allies, such as Brutus and Cassius. The murder of Julius Caesar did not restore the Republic. Instead, it marked the beginning of the end. His death plunged Rome into further civil war, and the political instability that had characterized the late Republic intensified. His adopted heir, Octavian, later Augustus, along with Mark Antony and Lepidus, formed the Second Triumvirate and set out to avenge Caesar's death. The resulting conflict led to the final defeat of Caesar's assassins at the Battle of Philippi in 42 BCE, and the power of the Senate continued to decline. With the fall of his enemies, Octavian emerged as the sole ruler of Rome, though he carefully avoided taking the title of king or emperor. Instead, he presented himself as the restorer of the Republic, even as he consolidated power in a way that was far from republican. By 27 BCE, Octavian had effectively become the first emperor of Rome, marking the official transition from republic to empire. Caesar's legacy, though cut short by his assassination, was profound. His political and military actions irreversibly altered the course of Roman history, setting in motion the transformation of Rome from a republic to an empire. Though his death did not immediately lead to the end of republican government, it left a power vacuum that could only be filled by a single ruler. His reign, though brief, demonstrated the limits of the Roman Republic's political structure in the face of extraordinary military power and ambition. And in Caesar's wake, the Republic, already weakened by internal divisions and class struggles, could never return to its former state. The rise and fall of Julius Caesar encapsulate the volatile and unpredictable nature of Roman politics during this period. It was an era of great ambition, great victories, and equally great betrayals. Caesar's life and death stand as a testament to the power of personal ambition and the fragile nature of republican systems. His legacy, though marked by conflict, was a crucial step in Rome's transition from a republic that had shaped the ancient world to the imperial system that would dominate it for centuries. Following centuries of conflict, power struggles, and internal strife, the Roman Empire finally entered a period of unprecedented stability and prosperity under the leadership of Augustus, the first emperor. This era, known as the Pax Romana or Roman peace, lasted for roughly 2 centuries, from 27 BCE to around 180 CE. The Pax Romana was not just a time of political stability, but also a flourishing of culture, commerce, and architecture. It marked the zenith of Roman power and influence, setting the stage for an enduring legacy that would shape the course of Western civilization for millennia. The origins of the Pax Romana lie in the aftermath of the chaotic years of civil war that followed Julius Caesar's assassination. After the defeat of Caesar's assassins, Augustus, who was then known as Octavian, emerged as the sole ruler of Rome. However, Augustus understood that, unlike his adoptive father, he could not rule as a dictator without risking the wrath of the Senate and the Roman people. Instead, he cleverly restored the appearance of the Roman Republic while consolidating absolute power in his own hands. Augustus held the title of princeps, or first citizen, rather than emperor, and he presented himself as the restorer of order and the protector of Roman traditions. In 27 BCE, Augustus offered to relinquish his powers, but the Senate, eager for stability, granted him sweeping control over both military and political affairs. The Senate's formal recognition of Augustus's authority marked the official beginning of the Roman Empire and the end of the Republic. Augustus's reign is often viewed as a masterclass in political strategy. He managed to maintain the facade of republican institutions while ensuring that he alone held the reins of power. His reign would forever alter the nature of Roman governance, solidifying the idea of an emperor as the central figure in Roman politics. One of Augustus's greatest achievements was his stabilization of the empire's borders. During the years of civil war, the Roman frontiers had been unstable, with various barbarian groups testing the empire's defenses. Augustus worked tirelessly to secure the borders, both through military campaigns and strategic diplomacy. In the north, he expanded Roman control into the territory of modern-day Germany and along the Danube River. In the east, Augustus secured Rome's influence over client kingdoms like Armenia and the Parthian Empire, ensuring that Rome's eastern border remained stable. Meanwhile, in the west, the conquest of Spain was completed, solidifying Roman control over the Iberian Peninsula. Augustus also ensured the loyalty of Rome's provinces by appointing loyal governors and by encouraging the spread of Roman culture and law. Under Augustus, Rome's military prowess was not just about conquest, but also about maintaining order. The legions, the backbone of Roman military might, were reorganized and stationed along the empire's borders to ensure that they were ready to defend the empire from any potential threat. Augustus also established a standing army, which provided a constant presence on the frontiers, as well as an elite force known as the Praetorian Guard to protect the emperor and maintain order within the city of Rome itself. But the Pax Romana was not solely defined by military success. Augustus also understood that a thriving economy was essential to the empire's stability. One of his major reforms was the establishment of a single currency that circulated throughout the empire, facilitating trade and commerce. The wealth generated from trade allowed Rome to build monumental public works, such as roads, aqueducts, and bridges, which improved communication and transportation across the vast empire. The Romans were also masters of engineering, and their ability to build durable infrastructure was a key factor in maintaining control over distant provinces. The growth of trade under Augustus helped stimulate cultural exchange between Rome and its neighbors. The empire's expansive road network allowed goods, ideas, and people to move freely across vast distances. From the British Isles to Egypt, Roman merchants, soldiers, and officials spread Roman culture, language, and traditions. The influence of Roman culture was particularly pronounced in the cities of the empire, where Roman laws, architecture, and public entertainment, such as gladiatorial games, became central to the lives of the people. Culturally, the Pax Romana was a golden age for Roman literature and the arts. Augustus, ever the patron of culture, encouraged the flourishing of Roman literature and the arts as a means of legitimizing his rule and promoting Roman values. The poet Virgil wrote his epic Aeneid during this period, telling the story of Rome's mythical origins and glorifying the empire's divine destiny. Ovid, another poet of the time, produced works like the Metamorphoses, which influenced European literature for centuries to come. The historian Livy chronicled Rome's rise from its mythical beginnings to its present grandeur, while the architect Vitruvius wrote a comprehensive treatise on architecture that would shape the future of Roman building techniques. Augustus's rule also saw the construction of grand monuments that embodied the empire's power and cultural achievements. The Forum of Augustus, the Ara Pacis, and the Pantheon are just a few examples of the magnificent structures built during this period. These buildings not only demonstrated Rome's architectural ingenuity, but also served as symbols of the peace and prosperity Augustus had brought to the empire. The Pantheon, with its vast dome and intricate design, remains one of the most iconic and well-preserved examples of Roman architecture, and it continues to inspire architects to this day. The peace and stability of the Pax Romana allowed the empire to flourish in ways that would have been unimaginable during the years of civil war and internal conflict. The empire's population grew, and cities like Rome, Alexandria, and Antioch became bustling metropolises. The population of Rome alone reached over 1 million people, making it the largest city in the ancient world. These cities were the hubs of Roman life, where people from all walks of life, Romans, provincials, slaves, and free men, interacted and contributed to the vibrancy of Roman culture. While the Pax Romana was a period of peace and prosperity, it was not without its challenges. Despite Augustus's success in securing the borders, the empire faced occasional uprisings and conflicts with barbarian tribes. In the east, the Parthians and other eastern powers posed threats to Roman interests. Domestically, Augustus faced political challenges from rivals within Rome, though his ability to navigate these tensions without resorting to tyranny ensured that the empire remained stable. Augustus's reign laid the foundation for the Roman Empire, which would continue to thrive under his successors, particularly emperors like Tiberius, Claudius, and Trajan. The Pax Romana lasted for nearly 2 centuries, a time when Rome's influence stretched across the known world, from the sands of Egypt to the misty hills of Britain. The Roman Empire, at its height, was a global power unlike any the world had seen before, and its cultural, political, and technological innovations continue to resonate in modern society. As time passed, however, the cracks in the empire's foundation began to show. The later years of the Pax Romana saw increased political instability, economic troubles, and military overreach. Despite these challenges, the Pax Romana remains one of the most remarkable periods in world history, an era when Rome stood at the apex of its power, radiating influence across the Mediterranean world and beyond. By the beginning of the 3rd century CE, the Roman Empire, once a beacon of strength and stability, began to show signs of profound internal strain. The Pax Romana had faded into memory, and in its place emerged a period of uncertainty and turbulence known as the Crisis of the 3rd century. This was a time when the empire seemed on the brink of collapse, beset by economic instability, military insurrection, and relentless invasions from barbarian groups. The cracks in Rome's once unified political structure were widening, and the fate of the empire hung precariously in the balance. The roots of the crisis were numerous, with one of the main causes being the sheer size and complexity of the Roman Empire. As the empire expanded across 3 continents, from the British Isles in the west to Mesopotamia in the east, it became increasingly difficult to govern and defend. Rome's vast borders required constant vigilance, and the demands placed on the military were immense. The sheer scale of the empire made it difficult for a single emperor to manage all its challenges effectively. The situation was further complicated by a growing sense of political and military fragmentation within the empire itself. At the heart of the crisis were the barracks emperors, military leaders who came to power by force and whose reigns were often short-lived and unstable. The military anarchy of this period was characterized by the rapid turnover of emperors, many of whom were elevated to the throne by their troops, only to be overthrown by rival factions or assassinated in power struggles. Between 235 and 284 CE, there were at least 26 different emperors, most of whom were military men with little regard for the political systems of the empire. These emperors were constantly engaged in battles for control, not only with external enemies, but with each other as well. During this time, the Roman legions, once the bedrock of Roman military power, became less cohesive. The loyalty of the legions shifted from the emperor to their individual commanders, who often saw themselves as more powerful than the emperor they served. This decentralization of power within the military weakened the authority of Rome's central government. The empire's borders, once secured under the reign of Augustus and his successors, were now under constant threat. In the west, the empire faced invasions from the Franks and Goths, while in the east, the Sassanid Persians threatened Roman holdings in the Near East. The economic situation during the crisis of the 3rd century was equally dire. Constant warfare drained the empire's resources, and the costs of maintaining an ever-expanding military, along with the need to defend against invasions, led to rampant inflation. The denarius, once a silver coin used throughout the empire, was debased, losing its value as the metal content was reduced. This inflation, coupled with high taxes to fund the military, put immense pressure on the common people and further destabilized Roman society. Trade, too, suffered, as the empire's roads and infrastructure, once the pride of Roman engineering, became unsafe and difficult to maintain. In addition to military and economic challenges, the Roman Empire faced internal division. The central authority in Rome, once the driving force behind the unity of the empire, was increasingly undermined by local warlords, who ruled over their own territories with little regard for imperial oversight. This fragmentation of power led to what is known as the Gallic Empire, a breakaway state that included the provinces of Gaul, Britain, and Hispania. The Gallic Empire was founded in 260 CE by the general Postumus, who declared himself emperor after Rome's power had become too weak to maintain control. The Gallic Empire lasted for over a decade before being reincorporated into the Roman Empire, but it highlighted the vulnerability of Rome's western provinces. The crisis also saw the rise of separatist movements within the empire's borders. In the eastern provinces, the Palmyrene Empire was formed under Queen Zenobia in the 270s CE, after the decline of Roman authority in the region. Zenobia, a brilliant and ambitious ruler, expanded her empire to include Egypt and much of the Levant. She even declared herself empress and attempted to challenge Roman supremacy. While her empire was eventually crushed by the forces of Emperor Aurelian in 273 CE, her revolt revealed the fragility of Roman rule in the East and the growing power of local rulers. Despite the chaos, some Roman leaders did manage to restore a semblance of order. One such emperor was Aurelian, who ascended to the throne in 270 CE. Aurelian's reign marked a turning point in the crisis. He was a capable military leader who succeeded in pushing back the barbarian invaders, reconquering the Gallic and Palmyrene empires, and restoring stability to the empire's borders. He also undertook a number of reforms aimed at revitalizing the economy, including a major reorganization of the empire's coinage to combat inflation. Aurelian's victories were a significant achievement, but they were not enough to fully restore the empire to the glory of earlier centuries. The cracks in the Roman system were too deep, and the pressures of the crisis of the 3rd century were too great. The crisis did not fully end until the rise of Diocletian in 284 CE, who enacted sweeping reforms that would lay the foundation for the late empire. Diocletian divided the empire into two halves, with himself ruling the eastern half and appointing a co-emperor to rule the western half. This division, known as the Tetrarchy, aimed to address the logistical and administrative challenges posed by the empire's vast size. Diocletian also reorganized the military, overhauled the tax system, and initiated a series of economic reforms to stabilize the empire. Though his reforms brought temporary relief, the fundamental issues facing the Roman Empire, political instability, military decentralization, and external pressures, remained unresolved. In hindsight, the crisis of the 3rd century can be seen as both a product of Rome's immense success and the inherent weaknesses of its system. The very size and complexity that had allowed Rome to flourish became its undoing. The inability to adapt to these challenges, coupled with the failure of the central government to maintain control, nearly destroyed the empire. While the crisis was eventually mitigated by strong leaders like Aurelian and Diocletian, it marked the beginning of the empire's long, slow decline. A decline that would eventually lead to the fall of the Western Roman Empire centuries later. The Roman Empire, after enduring the turmoil of the crisis of the 3rd century, was in desperate need of revival. The political fragmentation, economic collapse, and military anarchy that had plagued the empire for decades had left it on the brink of collapse. But out of the chaos emerged a leader who would attempt to restore order, Emperor Diocletian. His reign, beginning in 284 CE, marked a significant turning point in Roman history, as Diocletian sought to enact a series of bold reforms that would stabilize the empire and ensure its survival for generations to come. Yet, despite his success in some areas, Diocletian's reforms would ultimately prove insufficient in addressing the deeper, more fundamental problems facing the empire. Diocletian was a soldier, not a senator, and his rise to power was marked by pragmatism and ruthlessness. After the death of the last of the barracks emperors, Diocletian emerged as the strongman who would take control of a fractured and faltering empire. His first order of business was to restore stability and confidence in Roman rule. Diocletian understood that the empire could no longer function as it once had, centralized under one ruler. The sheer size and complexity of the Roman world demanded a new form of governance. His solution was to divide the empire into two halves, the East and the West, each governed by a co-emperor. This marked the beginning of the Tetrarchy, or Rule of Four, with two senior emperors called Augusti and two junior emperors, or Caesars, each overseeing different territories. The division of the empire was an attempt to streamline governance and address the logistical challenges of such a vast and sprawling empire. By placing trusted officials in charge of different regions, Diocletian hoped to improve the efficiency of administration, military defense, and tax collection. In theory, this system allowed for more localized decision-making, ensuring that the empire could respond to threats more swiftly and decisively. In practice, however, it only further deepened the divide between East and West, setting the stage for long-term instability. Diocletian's first major reform was military. The Roman army, once the proudest fighting force in the world, had become a disjointed and overstretched institution during the 3rd century. Diocletian worked to strengthen the military by increasing its size, reorganizing the legions, and fortifying the empire's borders. One of his key strategies was to build a series of military fortresses along the empire's frontiers, particularly in the east and north. These fortresses were intended to act as defensive strongholds, designed to protect Roman territory from the incursions of barbarian tribes. The strategy worked to some extent, as the fortifications provided a more organized and defensible border system. However, the sheer scale of the empire made it impossible to prevent every attack, and the continuing pressure from barbarian groups like the Franks, Goths, and Sassanid Persians would continue to challenge Rome's security. While Diocletian's military reforms were essential for maintaining Roman power, it was his economic and administrative reforms that would have a more lasting impact on the empire. The crisis of the 3rd century had severely weakened Rome's economy, with rampant inflation, high taxation, and widespread poverty. Diocletian sought to address these issues by overhauling the empire's fiscal system. One of his most significant economic reforms was the introduction of the Edict on Maximum Prices, which attempted to curb inflation by setting price ceilings on goods and services. The edict was a direct response to the debasement of the Roman currency, particularly the denarius, which had lost much of its silver content. By fixing prices, Diocletian hoped to restore stability to the empire's economy. However, the edict on maximum prices was largely ineffective. While it did temporarily slow inflation, it was nearly impossible to enforce across such a vast empire. Local markets found ways to circumvent the price controls, and black markets flourished. The edict also failed to address the root causes of inflation, such as the constant debasement of the currency and the lack of a stable and efficient taxation system. Diocletian's attempt to stabilize the economy was an admirable one, but it proved insufficient in reversing the damage done during the previous century. Diocletian also sought to improve the empire's administrative structure. He reorganized the provinces, creating smaller, more manageable units called dioceses, each overseen by a governor. This restructuring was intended to make the empire more efficient, as the old system of large provinces had become unwieldy and prone to corruption. Diocletian's new system placed more emphasis on centralized control and tighter supervision from the imperial government. This helped to streamline the administration of the empire, but it also increased the concentration of power in the hands of the emperor, making the system more dependent on strong leadership. One of the most significant aspects of Diocletian's reign was his religious policies. Diocletian was a staunch defender of traditional Roman polytheism and the worship of the emperor as a god. As Christianity was growing rapidly throughout the empire, Diocletian saw the rise of the new religion as a threat to the unity of Roman society. In 303 CE, he initiated the Great Persecution, a series of brutal and widespread attacks on Christians throughout the empire. Churches were destroyed, Christian scriptures were burned, and thousands of Christians were imprisoned or executed. The persecution was intended to suppress the growing influence of Christianity and restore the old Roman religious practices. However, Diocletian's persecution of Christians had the opposite effect. Rather than eradicating Christianity, it galvanized the faith and made martyrs out of many of its followers. The persecution failed to stop the spread of Christianity, and within a few decades, the Emperor Constantine would embrace Christianity as the official religion of the empire, forever changing the course of Roman history. Despite Diocletian's many reforms, the long-term stability of the Roman Empire remained uncertain. His attempts to divide the empire into two halves may have helped in the short term, but they laid the groundwork for the eventual division of the empire into the Eastern and Western Roman empires. The Tetrarchy ultimately broke down after Diocletian's abdication in 305 CE, leading to a new round of civil war and instability. While Diocletian's reign marked a brief period of recovery for the empire, the deeper structural problems, economic inequality, military fragmentation, and the challenge of managing an empire of such vast proportions remained unresolved. In the end, Diocletian's reforms were insufficient to reverse the empire's decline, and the Western Roman Empire would continue its slow descent into collapse. The dawn of Christianity in the Roman Empire would forever alter the course of history, but it was not without its momentous turning points. One such pivotal moment came in the reign of Emperor Constantine the Great. As the first Roman emperor to embrace Christianity, Constantine's decisions would reshape the very foundation of the empire. His rise to power, his military victories, and his eventual conversion to Christianity would set in motion a series of events that would transform the Roman world, leaving a lasting legacy on both the empire and the world beyond. Constantine's journey to the throne was marked by political intrigue and military struggle. Born in 272 CE in the city of Nisus, in the province of Moesia, modern-day Serbia, Constantine was the son of the Roman general Constantius Chlorus, one of the emperors of the Tetrarchy. As a young man, Constantine was sent to the court of the Emperor Diocletian, where he received a military education and gained experience in the ways of Roman politics. After his father's death in 306 CE, Constantine was declared emperor by his troops in the western provinces of the empire, beginning his ascent to power. At the time, the Roman Empire was once again embroiled in civil war as rival emperors and their factions vied for control. Constantine's rise to power was not immediate or uncontested. In the years that followed, he faced several challenges from rivals, including the usurper Maxentius, who controlled Rome itself. In 312 CE, Constantine's forces clashed with Maxentius at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, a defining moment in Constantine's rise to dominance. Before the battle, Constantine is said to have had a vision. According to the History of the Church by Eusebius, Constantine saw a cross of light in the sky, accompanied by the words, "In this sign, conquer." Whether this vision was a divine intervention or a product of Constantine's own beliefs and ambitions is unclear, but it was a transformative moment. Constantine ordered his soldiers to paint the Christian symbol, the Chi-Rho, on their shields, and marched into battle with the belief that the Christian God would grant him victory. The battle at the Milvian Bridge was a decisive moment in Constantine's career. Constantine's forces, though outnumbered, were victorious, and Maxentius was killed in the fighting. Constantine's triumph was not just a military victory, it was a political and religious turning point. After his success, Constantine attributed his victory to the Christian God, and he began to move toward embracing Christianity as a key aspect of his rule. Constantine's conversion, however, was not a sudden or straightforward act. It was a gradual process that unfolded over several years. But the Edict of Milan, issued in 313 CE, was the formal declaration that Christianity would no longer be persecuted within the Roman Empire. The Edict of Milan marked a monumental shift in Roman policy. Constantine, alongside his co-emperor Licinius, declared religious tolerance for all religions, but the most significant aspect of the edict was its favorable treatment of Christianity. Christians, who had long been persecuted under earlier emperors, were now granted the freedom to practice their faith openly without fear of reprisal. The Edict of Milan allowed Christians to build churches, gather in public, and hold property, all of which had been restricted under previous regimes. While Constantine did not make Christianity the official religion of the empire at this point, his actions made it clear that the faith was now in a favored position. Constantine's support for Christianity was not merely a political move, it was a personal one as well. In the years that followed, Constantine's relationship with the Christian faith deepened. He became a patron of the church, providing financial support for the construction of Christian churches and giving land to Christian leaders. One of the most famous of these churches was the Basilica of St. Peter in Rome, which Constantine ordered to be built over the tomb of St. Peter, one of Christianity's most important figures. The basilica became a symbol of Constantine's commitment to Christianity and of Rome's growing importance as a center of Christian worship. Constantine's relationship with the church was not without its complications, however. He was deeply invested in the unity of the Christian faith, which was still divided over theological disagreements. The most significant of these divisions was the Arian controversy, which centered on the nature of Christ. The Arian controversy was a theological dispute that questioned whether Jesus Christ was of the same substance as God the Father, or whether he was a created being, distinct from God. Constantine, seeking to maintain peace within the empire, called the First Council of Nicaea in 325 CE to address this issue. The Council of Nicaea, attended by bishops from across the empire, produced the Nicene Creed, a statement of Christian faith that affirmed the divinity of Christ and sought to establish theological unity within the Church. Constantine himself played a significant role in the council, although he was not a theologian. He presided over the proceedings and was instrumental in shaping the outcome. The Nicene Creed would become the foundation of Christian doctrine for centuries to come, and Constantine's efforts to secure the unity of the Church helped to solidify Christianity's place in Roman society. As Constantine's reign continued, he enacted other reforms that further solidified his legacy as a Christian emperor. He made Sunday, the day of Christ's resurrection, a day of rest and worship throughout the empire. Constantine also provided privileges to the clergy, exempting them from certain taxes and allowing them to serve as judges in some cases. The emperor's support for Christianity helped to elevate the status of the Church and its leaders within Roman society. In 330 CE, Constantine made one of the most consequential decisions of his reign. He founded a new city, Constantinople, on the site of the ancient Greek city of Byzantium. The new city was strategically located on the border between Europe and Asia, and it quickly became a vibrant center of trade, culture, and politics. Constantinople was also designed to be the new Christian capital of the empire, a reflection of the growing importance of Christianity in Roman life. The city would go on to become the heart of the Byzantine Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire, which would endure for nearly 1,000 years after the fall of the Western Roman Empire. Constantine's conversion to Christianity and his subsequent support for the Church forever changed the Roman Empire. By the time of his death in 337 CE, Christianity had gone from being a persecuted minority religion to the dominant faith of the Roman Empire. Constantine's legacy as the first Christian emperor would influence the course of Western civilization for centuries, shaping the development of Christian theology, church-state relations, and the role of religion in governance. Yet, despite Constantine's monumental influence, the empire was not free from internal conflict. The division between East and West, already beginning to emerge under Diocletian, would continue to grow in the centuries to come. The foundations laid by Constantine would help to preserve Roman civilization in the East. But the Western Roman Empire would face increasing pressures from barbarian invasions, economic decline, and internal divisions, events that would eventually lead to its collapse in the 5th century CE. By the time of Constantine's death in 337 CE, the Roman Empire was already showing signs of internal disintegration. Although Constantine had attempted to strengthen the empire by establishing a Christian foundation and creating a new capital in Constantinople, the empire remained too vast and complex for a single ruler to govern effectively. The seeds of division, sown by the challenges of governing such an expansive territory, would soon bear fruit. The Roman Empire, which had once stood as a unified whole, would be irrevocably split into two distinct halves, the Eastern Roman Empire and the Western Roman Empire. The division was not an immediate result of Constantine's death, but rather the culmination of long-standing administrative and military challenges. While Constantine had established a new capital in the East, he had also divided the empire among his sons, who inherited separate territories. His sons, though they continued to uphold the notion of a unified Roman Empire, often found themselves at odds with one another. The weakening of central authority led to increasing instability, and as the years passed, the empire became harder to manage. In 395 CE, the Roman Empire formally split after the death of Theodosius III, the last emperor to rule both East and West. Theodosius III had been a strong ruler, but his death marked the end of a unified empire. His sons, Arcadius and Honorius, each inherited control over different parts of the empire. Arcadius becoming emperor of the East, with his capital in Constantinople, and Honorius assuming rule over the West, with the capital at Ravenna. This division would eventually become permanent, marking the beginning of the Eastern Roman Empire, or the Byzantine Empire, and the Western Roman Empire. The two halves of the empire had starkly different fates. The Eastern Roman Empire, with its capital in Constantinople, was wealthier and more secure. Its location on the Bosporus Strait provided strategic advantages for trade and defense, while its cities, including the newly founded Constantinople, were thriving centers of commerce and culture. The East had a strong economy, a well-organized military, and a relatively stable government. The Byzantine Empire, as it would come to be known, would survive for nearly 1,000 years after the fall of the Western Empire, enduring until 1453, when it fell to the Ottoman Turks. In contrast, the Western Roman Empire was far more vulnerable. Its borders were increasingly threatened by waves of barbarian invasions, and its internal structure was weakened by political corruption, economic strain, and social unrest. While the East could rely on its wealth and fortified cities, the West struggled to maintain control over its vast and fragmented territory. Over time, the Western Empire was beset by internal power struggles, with numerous emperors rising and falling with little stability. This instability only made it easier for barbarian groups like the Visigoths, Vandals, and Huns to press deeper into Roman territory. The decline of the Western Roman Empire was further exacerbated by its increasingly fragmented military and a lack of effective leadership. The once proud legions were now often composed of mercenaries, many of whom were more loyal to their commanders than to the empire itself. In addition, the Roman Senate had lost much of its influence, and the imperial court was increasingly dominated by military leaders. With the Roman system of governance in disarray, the Western Empire was no longer able to effectively repel the growing number of invasions from outside its borders. In 410 CE, the Visigoths, led by their king Alaric, sacked Rome, a blow that symbolized the collapse of the Western Empire's authority. This was the first time in over 800 years that the city of Rome had fallen to an enemy, and it shook the very foundations of Roman power. Though the empire managed to survive for a few more decades, the fall of Rome marked a clear turning point. The Western Roman Empire was in decline, and its disintegration was inevitable. The final blow to the Western Roman Empire came in 476 CE, when the last Roman emperor of the West, Romulus Augustulus, was deposed by the barbarian chieftain Odoacer. With this event, the Western Roman Empire ceased to exist, though the Eastern Roman Empire would continue to thrive. The collapse of the West did not mark the end of Roman influence, however. The legacy of Rome, particularly in the fields of law, architecture, and governance, would continue to shape Europe for centuries to come, especially in the Byzantine Empire, which preserved many aspects of Roman culture and administration. The division of the Roman Empire had long-lasting consequences. The Western Empire's fall left behind a fragmented political landscape, with various barbarian kingdoms taking root across the former territories of Rome. In the East, the Byzantine Empire would continue to hold the torch of Roman civilization, even as the West struggled to rebuild itself in the aftermath of the collapse. This division would be felt for centuries, as the East and West followed different trajectories, with the Byzantine Empire continuing to preserve much of the Roman world's intellectual and cultural heritage, while the West slowly transitioned into the medieval period. Yet, despite its fall, the story of the Western Roman Empire did not end entirely in defeat. In the centuries that followed, Rome's influence lived on in the form of the Catholic Church, which emerged as a powerful institution in the West. The Church, centered in Rome, would inherit the mantle of the Roman legacy and play a central role in shaping the course of European history throughout the Middle Ages. As the Eastern Roman Empire flourished in the East, the West would experience a series of transformations. It would enter the Dark Ages, but out of this period would eventually emerge the foundations of medieval European society, which was deeply influenced by the memory of Rome. Through the preservation of Roman knowledge, the spread of Christianity, and the eventual rise of powerful European kingdoms, the legacy of Rome would continue to shape the course of history. The Western Roman Empire, already weakened by decades of political instability, economic strain, and internal strife, found its demise sealed by the relentless onslaught of barbarian invasions. While these invasions were the final blows to an empire that had once ruled the Mediterranean world, they were also a reflection of the larger shifts taking place across Europe during the 5th century. As the Roman world began to crumble, new powers were rising in the north, tribes and confederations that would shape the future of Europe, bringing an end to the ancient world and ushering in the Middle Ages. The first of these tribes to make their mark on the Western Empire were the Visigoths. These Germanic peoples had long been a part of Rome's peripheral vision, often in conflict with the empire as they pushed southward from their homelands in what is now modern-day Scandinavia and Germany. By the early 5th century, the Visigoths had crossed the Danube and begun to settle along the empire's eastern borders. They were led by their king, Alaric I, who had originally sought peace with the empire but became increasingly disillusioned with Roman promises. In 410 CE, Alaric and his army marched on Rome itself. The city, once a symbol of Roman power, was unprepared for the attack. Rome's walls, weakened by neglect and lack of resources, could not withstand the Visigothic assault. For 3 days, the Visigoths plundered the city, looting its treasures and devastating its buildings. The sack of Rome was a seismic event, marking the first time in over 800 years that the city had fallen to an enemy force. The impact on the Roman world was profound. Though the empire would continue to exist in the West for a few more decades, the sack of Rome in 410 CE was a clear sign that the Western Empire was in its death throes. Following the Visigoths, another group of Germanic tribes, the Vandals, pushed westward into the Roman territories. Led by their king, Genseric, the Vandals crossed the Strait of Gibraltar and entered the Roman province of North Africa. They quickly seized control of Carthage, a vital and wealthy city, and established a kingdom there. The Vandals' control of North Africa allowed them to launch devastating raids along the Mediterranean coast, and in 455 CE, they sacked Rome in much the same way the Visigoths had done 45 years earlier. Though the Vandals did not destroy the city as thoroughly as Alaric's forces had, their raid was a symbol of the empire's utter vulnerability. The Western Roman Empire, already plagued by weak leadership and constant threats from barbarian groups, now faced another blow that further undermined its ability to function. Yet, it was the Huns, a fierce, nomadic group from the Eurasian steppes, that would prove to be the most fearsome invaders to threaten the empire. Under the leadership of their legendary king Attila, the Huns swept across Europe with an unparalleled ferocity. They were feared by all who encountered them, and their rapid conquests devastated entire regions. In 451 CE, Attila's Huns, joined by Germanic allies, advanced into Gaul, where they faced a combined Roman and barbarian army at the Battle of the Catalonian Plains. Although the Romans and their allies managed to defeat the Huns, the battle was not enough to stop Attila's advance. His armies continued to threaten Italy, and in 452 CE, Attila invaded the northern Italian peninsula. Though the Huns ultimately retreated, the threat they posed to the empire was unmistakable. Even after Attila's death in 453 CE, the Huns continued to plague the empire's eastern frontiers. As the barbarian invasions ravaged the Western Empire, internal collapse was already well underway. The Roman government, weakened by decades of mismanagement, was unable to cope with the pressure. The imperial court, once the seat of Roman power, had become a shadow of its former self. The emperor's authority had eroded, and the Roman military, once the most disciplined and organized fighting force in the ancient world, was no longer the cohesive unit it had once been. Instead, the empire relied more and more on mercenaries, often barbarian soldiers who were not always loyal to the Roman cause. By 476 CE, the final act of the Western Roman Empire's fall was set into motion. the last Roman emperor of the West, Romulus Augustulus, was deposed by a Germanic chieftain named Odoacer. Romulus was a young boy when he ascended to the throne, and his reign was little more than a symbolic gesture of the empire's decline. Odoacer, a leader of the Heruli tribe, marched into Italy with his forces and removed Romulus from power, declaring himself King of Italy. Odoacer's deposition of Romulus Augustulus is traditionally seen as the end of the Western Roman Empire. Meanwhile, the Eastern Roman Empire, which had been able to weather the storm of invasions due to its stronger economy, military and fortifications, would continue to thrive as the Byzantine Empire. Centered in Constantinople, the Byzantine Empire would endure for nearly 1,000 years after the fall of the West, preserving many aspects of Roman culture and governance and passing them down through the ages. The Byzantines would continue to serve as the heirs to the Roman legacy, even as the West entered a period of fragmentation and transformation. The barbarian invasions and the eventual fall of the Western Roman Empire were not just the end of an era. They were the beginning of a new chapter in European history. The tribes that had once been seen as mere invaders began to settle into the lands of the former empire, establishing kingdoms that would lay the foundation for modern Europe. In many ways, the fall of Rome marked the end of the ancient world and the beginning of the medieval age, a period in which Roman ideals, modified by Christianity and barbarian customs, would shape the future of the continent. Although the Western Roman Empire fell in 476 CE, the legacy of Rome persisted, particularly in the East and through the cultures that emerged from its ruins. The contributions Rome made to Western civilization, spanning areas of law, architecture, engineering, and culture, left a profound and lasting impact that continues to shape the modern world. Though the empire itself crumbled, its ideas, innovations, and traditions were carried forward by the Byzantine Empire and later civilizations, particularly through the preservation and adaptation of Roman heritage. One of Rome's most enduring legacies is its legal system. Roman law, with its sophisticated structure and principles, became the foundation for many modern legal systems. The Corpus Juris Civilis, compiled under the Byzantine Emperor Justinian in the 6th century, preserved Roman legal thought and became the basis for the legal systems in many European countries, particularly in continental Europe. The concept of civil rights, private property, contracts, and the rule of law, all central to Roman legal thought, continue to influence contemporary legal structures today. Roman contributions to architecture and engineering also left an indelible mark. The Roman innovations in building, from the widespread use of concrete to the development of the arch, enabled the construction of monumental structures such as aqueducts, baths, bridges, and roads. Many of these engineering marvels, such as the Roman aqueducts, are still in use today. Roman roads, too, facilitated not only military conquest, but also trade and cultural exchange, laying the groundwork for European infrastructure development in the centuries that followed. Culturally, the Romans helped preserve and adapt Greek art, philosophy, and science, and their integration of these ideas into Roman society helped spread them throughout Europe. Roman literature, philosophy, and education influenced the Renaissance and the development of Western intellectual traditions. While the Western Roman Empire collapsed in the 5th century, its eastern counterpart, the Byzantine Empire, thrived for nearly 1,000 years longer, continuing to preserve and evolve many of Rome's cultural, political, and military traditions. Centered in Constantinople, the Byzantine Empire served as the last great bastion of Roman civilization, both in the East and for much of Europe. Though the term Byzantine would not be used until centuries later, its legacy is intrinsically linked to the continuation of Roman heritage after the fall of the West. Constantinople, established by Emperor Constantine in 330 CE, was strategically located on the Bosporus Strait, connecting Europe and Asia. This prime location allowed the Byzantines to control crucial trade routes between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean, making the empire a wealthy and powerful force. The city's natural defenses, with its walls and position on a peninsula, also made it nearly impregnable. As a result, Constantinople became not only the heart of the Byzantine Empire, but also a shining symbol of Roman architectural and engineering prowess. One of the most enduring contributions of the Byzantine Empire was the preservation of Roman law, particularly through the Corpus Juris Civilis, or the body of civil law, codified under Emperor Justinian I in the 6th century. This compilation of Roman legal principles laid the foundation for the legal systems of many modern nations. The Corpus Juris Civilis became the cornerstone of Byzantine governance and played a significant role in shaping European legal traditions long after the Byzantine Empire had fallen. Justinian's reign, 527–565 CE, was marked by his ambitious efforts to restore the Roman Empire to its former glory. He sought to reclaim the lost territories of the Western Empire, most notably in North Africa, Italy, and parts of Spain. Though his military campaigns met with limited success, they were emblematic of the Byzantine commitment to maintaining Roman ideals and influence across the Mediterranean. His reign also saw the construction of the magnificent Hagia Sophia, one of the greatest architectural achievements of the Byzantine Empire. The Hagia Sophia's dome, its intricate mosaics, and its sheer scale all reflected the grandeur of Roman engineering, while simultaneously blending it with Byzantine, artistic and theological innovations. In addition to preserving Roman law and architecture, the Byzantines also continued to shape Roman art, literature, and philosophy. Through the Byzantine Renaissance, the empire kept alive the knowledge of the classical world, preserving ancient texts and transmitting them to future generations. Many of these works, including those of Greek philosophers and Roman authors, would later be rediscovered in the West during the Renaissance. However, the Byzantine Empire was not merely a passive continuation of Rome. It adapted and evolved in response to changing circumstances. The Byzantines developed a unique Christian identity which set them apart from their Roman predecessors. Christianity, which had been legalized and established as the state religion under Constantine, became deeply intertwined with the empire's political and cultural life. The Eastern Orthodox Church, led by the Patriarch of Constantinople, played a central role in Byzantine society, influencing everything from education to diplomacy. Despite its resilience and cultural achievements, the Byzantine Empire was eventually weakened by internal struggles, external threats, and the growing power of the Ottoman Turks. In 1453, Constantinople fell to the Ottomans after a prolonged siege, marking the end of the Byzantine Empire and the final extinction of the Roman Empire's direct political legacy. However, the empire's influence lived on, especially in the Christian world. The Eastern Orthodox Church and many aspects of Byzantine culture continued to shape Eastern Europe and Russia for centuries to come. The Byzantine Empire, though often overlooked in the broader narrative of Roman history, was a direct continuation of Roman civilization in the East. Its resilience, its preservation of Roman law and culture, and its role as a bridge between the ancient and medieval worlds made it a pivotal force in the development of Europe and the Mediterranean region. The story of Rome is one of cycles: growth, triumph, decay, and rebirth. From its humble beginnings as a village on the banks of the Tiber River to its rise as a vast empire that dominated the known world, Rome's journey was shaped by ambition, military genius, political innovation, and cultural assimilation. Yet, as with all great empires, it was also defined by its eventual decline. The fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 CE, marked by the deposition of the last emperor, Romulus Augustulus, is often seen as the end of the ancient world. However, this end was not abrupt or absolute. Instead, it was a slow unraveling, a series of events and forces, both internal and external, that chipped away at the foundation of one of history's most powerful civilizations. The reasons for Rome's fall are as complex as the empire itself. On one hand, there were external pressures. The barbarian invasions, first the Visigoths, then the Vandals, and later the Huns, hammered away at the empire's already weakened borders. These groups, once on the periphery of Roman society, grew stronger and more organized, eventually threatening the empire's very existence. The Roman military, which had once been a powerful, disciplined force, found itself struggling to adapt to these new threats. The reliance on mercenaries, often from the very barbarian tribes that threatened the empire, further diluted the strength of the Roman legions. Internal factors also played a crucial role in Rome's decline. Political instability was a constant throughout the empire's later years. The once stable system of leadership, which had been based on a senate and elected consuls, gave way to power struggles, corruption, and weak emperors who could not maintain control of the vast empire. The political infighting that ensued led to frequent changes in leadership, with emperors often coming and going in quick succession. This instability made it difficult for the empire to respond effectively to the growing number of threats from outside and within. Economically, Rome was also in decline. The empire's vast size made it increasingly difficult to govern efficiently. Resources were stretched thin, and the empire's reliance on slave labor hindered technological progress. Additionally, rampant inflation, excessive taxation, and a reliance on conquest to sustain the empire's economy eroded its financial stability. As trade routes were disrupted by invasions and the empire's infrastructure began to fall into disrepair, the Roman economy, once the strongest in the world, began to collapse. Religiously, the rise of Christianity also contributed to the transformation of Roman society, although this is a more debated factor. In the early days of the empire, Roman religion was polytheistic, and its leadership was seen as the embodiment of divine authority. However, by the 4th century, Christianity had become the state religion, a shift that profoundly changed the cultural and spiritual landscape of the empire. As Rome's institutions were increasingly aligned with Christian doctrine, many traditional Roman values, such as the focus on civic duty, military valor, and civic unity, began to weaken. Some historians argue that Christianity, with its focus on the afterlife, diminished the Roman commitment to preserving the empire's temporal power and military strength. However, The fall of the Western Roman Empire did not mark the end of Rome's influence. Even as the Western Empire crumbled, Roman culture, law, and traditions were carried forward by the Byzantine Empire in the East. The Byzantine Empire continued to uphold Roman law and governance for nearly 1,000 years after the fall of Rome, preserving much of the legacy of the ancient world. The fall of the Western Roman Empire also paved the way for the rise of new civilizations. The barbarian tribes that had once threatened the empire gradually settled into the territories they had conquered, laying the foundations for the medieval kingdoms of Europe. Over time, these kingdoms would emerge as the political entities that would shape the future of Europe, each in its own way carrying a piece of Rome's heritage. The legacy of Roman law, its military tactics, its engineering feats, and its cultural contributions would influence the development of Western civilization for centuries to come. Rome's fall is often seen as a tragedy, a great loss to civilization. Yet, it is also a testament to the resilience of ideas. The intellectual and cultural achievements of Rome, particularly in the fields of law, architecture, and philosophy, have never truly disappeared. From the ruins of its empire, the Roman legacy lived on in the Byzantine Empire, in the kingdoms of medieval Europe, and in the cultural foundations of modern Western societies. The fall of Rome, then, is not merely a story of decline, but a transformation, one that shaped the world in profound ways. Rome may have fallen, but its influence is still felt in the laws we follow, the cities we build, and the values we uphold. Even as the last emperor of the West was deposed, the essence of Rome lived on, echoing through history, shaping civilizations and guiding the course of human progress. As our exploration of the rise and fall of the Roman Empire comes to a close, take a moment to reflect on the mysteries we've uncovered. The rise of Rome, its towering legions, its remarkable leaders, and the intricate web of decisions and events that shaped its destiny. And yet, the echoes of its decline whisper to us, a reminder of the fragility of power. Let your mind rest on these reflections, feeling the weight of history settle within you, while the secrets of the past linger like an ancient riddle, unsolved. If this journey through the empire's rise and fall has intrigued you, please consider leaving a like, subscribing, or sharing your thoughts below. Your support is deeply appreciated and helps others find their way into these captivating stories. You can also turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our future mysteries. But for now, let your body relax, release any tension, and allow your mind to drift as you close your eyes and rest in the quiet after this tale. Good night and sleep well.